I don't mean to get too political right off the bat, but if you dislike Majora's Mask, you probably look like this. You probably hate other great games with time limits, you write long articles about how Dark Souls needs an easy mode, and one day you'll be buried in a Funko Pop coffin. And that's fine. We all like different things, and I hope you enjoy Captain Marvel too. But if you do happen to be a fan of Majora's Mask, then I've got some good news for you. A modder named Leo has released a patch called Project Restoration that fixes a lot of the issues that were present in the 3DS remake. While the 3DS version of Ocarina of Time is generally thought of as either a great visual update or the definitive version of the game, the same can't be said for Majora's Mask 3D. With a lot of the game's difficulty being nerfed for the sake of accessibility, the remake ended up feeling like a completely neutered version of what was once a tense and rewarding experience. And while it did sell well and satisfy a lot of new players, most of us older fans felt a little shortchanged by how much Nintendo had dumbed down the game. I won't be going through those changes in this video, mostly because I'm about 2 years late to the party. Another YouTuber by the name of Neril has covered all this already. Considering there's as many views on that video as there are sales for Majora's Mask 3D, I'm assuming you already know why this is such a contentious remake. If not, go watch that first, because Project Restoration seems to be a direct response to that video. It's not able to fix everything, but it does make the remake a hell of a lot better. There's a lot to cover here, so buckle up fellas. Zora Swimming now functions as it's supposed to, with Link being able to move and dive around like a dolphin without it draining your magic. Deku Link can once again build up acceleration and momentum when hopping across lily pads in the swamp. Ice arrows can be used pretty much anywhere with deep water, and the twinkling lights that used to indicate where they could be shot are now gone. Rather than only being able to save at owl statues, the player can now save their game after playing the Song of Time, which replicates how the saving worked on the N64. The giant, goofy eyeball weak points on Got, Kjorg, and Odolwa have been removed. Odolwa's AI has also been improved to make him less of a moron in combat. Twinmolt still has the eyeball, but now his hit counter no longer resets every time he burrows into the sand, leading to a boss fight that's far less frustrating and confusing. The inverted Song of Time slows the clock speed down to 1/3 again, the pop-up animations for the notebook are much faster, and the bombers no longer make a fool of themselves in cutscenes like this. And lastly, Captain Kida doesn't shuffle away from you like a giant granny with a walker. By far, the biggest quality of life change is now having your masks always available on the D-pad. This is such a simple change, and considering the D-pad is never used anywhere else, it's bizarre that Nintendo didn't think to do it themselves in the remake or on the N64. During the climb to Stone Tower and the dungeon itself, Link no longer plays the Elegy of Emptiness in full each time the player needs to use it. To make this tedious part of the game even less painful, the moving blocks have been sped up so that players no longer have to watch the same animations over and over again. A great fix, because if I wanted to sit on my ass and watch a bunch of animations, I could have just played Red Dead 2. For people playing the game on Citra, Project Restoration also adds a whole load of optional bindings and a high resolution HUD that makes the game easy to play on a controller. And while the shortcuts and button prompts do make this a whole lot simpler to play, I still think we aren't quite there yet with 3DS emulation. Even on a PC with a Ryzen 5 3600, I still experienced quite a lot of game speed dips and audio problems. It's nowhere near as smooth as emulating Ocarina of Time 3D, and without the second touchscreen, it feels a lot more slapped together than just playing it on a real 3DS or emulating the N64 original. If you're a PC guy without a 3DS who's never played Majora's Mask before, there's just no way I'd recommend playing it through 3DS emulation, even despite how nice it looks in HD. N64 emulation is still a bit of a mess for a lot of titles, but it's completely functional for Majora's Mask, and I'd happily recommend it for those who want to play on a big screen. Project Restoration takes what was once a weird, much shittier version of an all-time classic, and turns it into a remake that's pretty good. So to answer the clickbait in my title, kind of. There's a lot of great other little changes that I didn't mention, but there are still flaws in the remake which are outside the scope of a fan-made patch. And for a guy like me who has a stick up his ass about this kind of stuff, these remaining flaws still make the 3DS version hard to recommend for first-time players. Owl statues still allow the player to save an infinite number of times per play session, a function that makes sense for handheld play, but one that softens the satisfying challenge of planning each session according to the 3-day cycle. You know, what the whole game is built around. You don't have to save at these statues in the restoration patch, but I'd imagine that for a lot of players, the temptation to use them in difficult spots might be too strong. While the 3DS soundtrack uses higher quality samples than the N64, the inferior mixing of the game's audio makes Koji Kondo's brilliant soundtrack sound distant and tinny. There is a mod to replace the 3DS soundtrack with the superior N64 mix, but not everything works. Anyone that's played Majora's Mask knows how important the eerie and oppressive music is to the whole experience. It's my favourite soundtrack from any Nintendo game, so to hear it muffled on the 3DS is pretty disappointing. It's not horrible, but it does sound a lot weaker. Just like Ocarina 3D, I think Majora's Mask 3D is a great looking game for what it is. Grezzo totally nails a lot of the original style and faithfully updates it for modern hardware. But in a lot of really important areas, the overbrightening misses the point of these original graphics. This is probably going to come down to personal taste for a lot of people, but I think that the darker, grimier visuals of the N64 suit the tone of the game a lot better than the vibrant style they went with. The shadowy look of the original is as important to the experience as the moon itself is, and they fucked him up too. You might say that the fog, drab colours and dim lighting were just consequences of the graphical limitations of the N64, and that Nintendo always intended for the game to look this way. But I don't think that's completely true. By looking at the concept art for Ocarina of Time, we can see that Nintendo were aiming to create a colourful fairy tale looking world before that vision was hindered by the N64's texture cache. Grezzo did a great job of realising that original vision for Ocarina of Time 3D, but the concept art for Majora's Mask tells a different story. Characters are shrouded in shadow, less colourful and with a gloomy expression plastered across their face. The storybook quality of Ocarina of Time's artwork has been replaced with something much more cartoonishly morose to fit the tone of the game. It just makes sense that a game about the end of the world would have a grim soundtrack, tragic characters and a more subdued visual palette. Nintendo were obviously constrained by the hardware in the final game, but the mood they created wasn't an accident. For a lot of younger players though, the repulsion of these old graphics, a frame rate of 20 frames per second, and the hassle of setting up an emulator might just be too much to handle. As someone that grew up playing games from this era and dicking around with emulators, I can't really relate to any of these complaints personally, but I get it. That's why I'm glad that Project Restoration is as good as it is. Leo did a fantastic job on this patch. The changes he made are completely seamless, and it turns Majora's Mask 3D into something I'd say is great for younger players or older fans looking to replay the game with a new coat of paint. Playing what I think is an inferior version of Majora's Mask is still better than not playing it at all. But if you're an adult that's serious about playing this game for the first time and getting the whole picture of why it's such a big deal, I still wouldn't recommend this 3DS version, patch or no patch. To someone that hasn't played the game before, my complaints about the audio-visual presentation and the save system probably sound like nitpicking, but I wouldn't be so stubborn about it if I didn't think the tone and challenge of the original game wasn't so important. In terms of atmosphere and immersion, Majora's Mask sits up there with other masterpieces like Silent Hill 2, Thief, Resident Evil Remake, and Planescape Torment. It's one of those games that makes you forget you're even playing a game, where the rules and graphics can trick your brain into accepting it as a second reality in front of you. Replaying the apocalypse through the lens of a Japanese cartoon world is something that could only be possible through video games. For Nintendo, it's a crowning achievement that should sit up there with Mario Bros. 3, Super Metroid, and Ocarina of Time. Not a weird mistake that has to be stuck on the Wii U Virtual Console or fixed with a heavy-handed remake. It's a one-of-a-kind experience with the timeless foundations of the Zelda formula to support it. It's my personal favourite Zelda, and even though a lot of people struggle to enjoy it or totally hate it, Majora's Mask is a title that deserves the attention of anyone who loves single-player video games. While the patched 3DS version may be more convenient and palatable for a lot of players, it's still my least favourite of all the Zelda remakes. Majora's Mask is a game worth playing the right way, and to me, that's still the N64 version, through PC emulation, the Wii Virtual Console, or real hardware. To the younger viewers who might be watching this, I encourage you to challenge yourself a bit with these old games. By restricting yourself to better looking games that are more instantly rewarding, you're robbing yourself of a lot of what this medium has to offer. As always, I want to say thanks to my mum and the boys for making it all the way to the end of this video. Thanks again, and I'll see you when I see you.